I am disappointed here. I'm not finding it.
All right, I'm back. I am recording. Okay,
Got
so we're going to get started here.
I'm going to go on mute.
All right. And let me see if I can present my screen now. Present now. All right.
That's working.
That's working. Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and get started then. We have about 60 people total. So that's really good. Welcome, everybody. This is the June monthly meeting online. I took the liberty of grabbing a shot of the first manned U.S. space launch, which went off on Saturday. I'm hoping that most of you were able to catch that. It was pretty spectacular. I was not only impressed by the smoothness of the launch, but I was also impressed by the cockpit of the capsule and how much more modern it looks compared to the old Apollo ones. So it was pretty impressive, and kudos to SpaceX and to NASA for pulling this off. I think we've started a whole new age of manned space flight, and may actually get to the moon in 4 years or so. Okay, so let's see if this thing works. There we go. And oops, too many. Back up, back up. Oh my God, it's going forward. Hang on. Let me go back. I got to escape. Are you all still there? Let me try this again. Okay. All right, so there's our illustrious crew.
Not seeing it yet.
Nope. I must have lost the share somehow. Hang on.
You can just do it like charades and act everything out.
I could.
There we go.
Oh, what happened? Oh, there it is. Okay. Now the question is, will it move? I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Here's the treasurer's report. And Matt, you want to talk through this one?
Oh, I certainly can. It's pretty straightforward. I'm just taking a snapshot of 30 days back. Total cash, 129, almost 130,000. We do have dedicated funds. I've moved those to the bottom for the JJ Casby dome repair and the ELL, or actually the Onan roof repair, so upgrade, make it easier to roll, safer.
Are those totals part of the total cash though that you have at the top?
Yeah, they are. So
Okay.
It's like if you take that total and subtract off the dedicated funds, that's what we've got to work with, essentially. So
Okay.
and we're not in any risk of running out of money right now. But anyway, so we got the TCF account. Income again is mostly membership dues at a whole $11.31 from Amazon Smile. So thank you for shopping smile.amazon when you do that, and get us a little bit of a freebie. Let's see. Then the expenses, again, normally operating utilities and that kind of stuff. And then we're getting started on the ELO, or I'm sorry, I keep saying that, the Onan roof. Got some expenses in there for the plans and stuff, and then they'll eventually start, charging for labor and materials and stuff like that. And then also we I don't know when we're getting it, Mark Job. We're getting in the imaging camera for Cherry Grove soon. You want to chime in? Maybe not.
Is he on?
Hopefully. Yeah, so I understand it's a nice camera. I don't know many of the details about it.
So let me talk about that a little bit. So,
yeah.
so the group who's been involved with putting together the imaging rig down in Cherry Grove, and there's a number of people involved in that. Kind of kicked around the idea of a camera that would be appropriate for the Takahashi, which is what we're going to actually mount this camera on, and to hook things up so that the imaging system is going to be pretty simple to use, even for a beginner imager. They can bring down a flash drive and hopefully be able to fire the whole thing up, and the camera will already be connected. And so that the idea is that it's going to be really easy for people to take images with the Takahashi down there, and then take those images home on a flash drive, and they can then process them with whatever image processing tool they want to use. So this is not, although it looks like $2,000 to a lot of us would be pretty expensive for a camera. It's kind of a it's a
middle of the road. It's a middle of the road camera.
Yeah, it's a middle of the road camera. So it's not the most expensive you can get, but it's going to be good for what we're using on the Takahashi there.
Yeah, it's going to be a nice camera. Everybody's going to enjoy that gets to use it. The only other piece I wanted to add about it is it's on back order, and the reason we had to kind of press to get it on order is because OPT, who we purchased from, is expecting a shipment in a couple weeks, and they only had a few places left, a few cameras left out of that shipment, and we wanted to be part of it. Otherwise, we had no idea when we were going to get one. So that's why it was kind of sprung on the board.
Right.
Thank you, board.
No problem.
Yeah, it looks pretty nice though. I mean, what I saw of your specifications, it's cooled and chilled and all that kind of stuff. You had some pretty stringent requirements to make it a very useful device, and we all get to try it before you buy your own, I suppose, right? And see what
that's
you really
kind of
want.
the idea.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. PayPal is kind of floating along. We get a lot of our membership dues from that, so that's all the income, no expenses. I already mentioned Smile. The total for the year is $25, so it's not a lot, but it's a little something. Maybe we can buy pizza with it or something else.
Yeah, Matt, can you repeat again? How do we contribute to that?
Yeah, if you are going to use Amazon, just log in using smile.amazon.com and then log in with your own username as you normally would. If you're not signed up, it will take you to a screen to get you signed up. And at that point, you need to select your charitable organization. And Minnesota Astronomical Society shows up very easily, and you can select that. And you can change the company or the group you want to send your donation to anytime you want to. But it's a really easy thing to set up. I've done it myself, and I don't know if it's probably a few pennies on most purchases, but it does add up. So let's see, letting people in the door here. I think that's the bulk of it. We got the membership. Steve updated that back in mid-May, so 524 members, active members, which is quite impressive, actually.
I'm very pleased that we haven't dropped off. We've maintained a pretty stable number of members, so that's good. All right. Well, thanks. Right. Appreciate that. Mm-hmm. All right. And next is the Lunar Scope program. Anton, I saw where you joined. Are you able to talk to this?
Yes, I can. Okay, so the Lunar Scope program is in operation. Just make the requests online as usual. I'm conducting the telescope exchanges in my driveway with masks and social distancing as best we can. And we also have a new one added. We have a Celestron NexStar 102 SLT go-to scope. it's now scope number 1 on the website.
All right. Very good. All right. And just out of curiosity, how many scopes do you currently have loaned out? Quite a few.
Yeah, I mean, there are more scopes out than in.
Okay.
This week's kind of busy. I've got a bunch coming in and a bunch going out, and it's kind of like a lot of choreography going on here in my driveway.
Yeah.
And but yeah, the large Dobbs are popular. The Skywatch has been popular, and the go-to Schmidt Cassegrains are popular.
Sure. Okay.
So can you explain briefly how you get in contact or ask what's available? I don't know that are you keeping up the website at this time for what's available, or is it that's the whole selection there?
Well, actually, when you use the website, you are asked to provide your first, second, and third choice for telescope. The website doesn't tell you which ones are available at that particular time, mostly because they can come in and out at any time. So you make your first, second, and third choice, and then I will compare that with what's available and get back to you.
Sounds good. Okay. Moving right along. Upcoming celestial events. So yesterday, Venus was at inferior conjunction. Saw a number of images, including an image from Merle in the forums. A very crescent Venus just prior to going to inferior conjunction. And so it's going to be coming out and becoming a morning star here very shortly. So that's pretty cool. Today, we have Mercury at greatest eastern elongation at 23.6 degrees. I don't know if I suppose you can be able to see it. It's sunny here, so you might be able to see it if you take a peek outside after the sun sets, of course. Might be a little tough to find without anything to reference it to. But then tomorrow we have the full moon, and there's a penumbral lunar eclipse. Not here. It's actually over in Africa and Europe and the like. But a penumbral eclipse is pretty tough to see anyway. I've got an image on the right there that shows you how much of the moon's going to actually be in part of the Earth's penumbra. So it'll be pretty tough to see. On June 8th, about 9 hours apart, you've got the Jupiter-Moon conjunction at 2.2 degrees and Saturn-Moon conjunction at 2.7 degrees. And 4 days later, Mars-Moon conjunction at 2.7 degrees. And then on the 19th, there'll be a Venus and Moon conjunction, and there'll be an actual occultation. Not here. That's up in way eastern Canada and far New England, up New England area. Then on the 13th, we have the last quarter moon. The solstice arrives on the 20th, and we then get longer nights after that. Have a new moon on the 21st and a first quarter moon on the 28th. Anything else we need to mention? I didn't put any cometary information in here because I'm not real sure what comets are really visible at this point. All the ones that I've seen have been kind of dim. So
this is Clayton. You might want to. Some people may be interested in Starlink.
Starlink.
They just launched another set. So if you want to see the train, it'll be tonight about 10:06.
10:06 tonight. Okay.
Yeah, you can check out. There's Heavens Above and other sites you can check out. But
yeah, they just launched that yesterday, I think. So, okay, yeah. Okay, I've never actually seen it in person. I've seen images of it, so maybe I'll wander out there at 10:06 and see if I can find it. Do you know where it's going to be? Is it southeast and northwest type thing?
It will start in the southwest, heading
southwest, okay,
to the northeast, and it will go. Let's see, maybe. Trying to see what it will go under. I mean, I can show.
Does it go pretty high?
Maybe at its highest, it'll probably be like 35, 40 degrees.
Okay. Be a little tough for me to see, but I might be able to. Okay, cool. All right, anything else? All right. So June star parties. Well, there's no public star parties in June. we have our impromptu star parties per the published site rules. So on the forums, and we've also sent out some correspondence on this. We do have rules about the sites. As the governor changes, his rules and the health department, we will certainly modify our site rules too. So, but they are what they are right now, and but we are getting some people who are actually able to go out and do some stargazing under darker skies than what they probably have in the cities here for sure. Any questions about that? Okay, and we also, I don't know if you saw it or not, but we also have some rules now for the Long Lake Conservation Center. So if you're interested in going up there, I know that the July 4th weekend's coming up. I don't know if anything will change before then or not. So then there's trainings this month. Merle, are you on? Do you want to talk about these a little bit? Thought I saw you somewhere.
Yeah, I'm here.
Do you want to talk about the 2 trainings coming up?
Yeah, you can just sign up on the forum. They're both on the either JJ Casby forum or the Eagle Lake forum. And we're limiting participants, of course, first come, first serve. I think we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. We got room for maybe 2 or 3 more trainees for this Saturday. And I haven't totaled up the June 13th Eagle Lake training yet. But
Okay.
Should be some open spots, I think. At least a couple.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. All right. Public service announcements. Mark, Job, or Doug Neverman, are we still on for Saturday, August 1st?
We are considering delaying or postponing that. Some things have come up. We're not really sure about what the rules are going to be, so we're just going to press pause for this month and see how things work out. But most likely we're either going to delay or just postpone it till next year, maybe. So stay tuned.
We'll get an update then at the July meeting, and
Yes.
And then we'll let everybody know.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. And is there any other public service announcements? Okay, not a whole lot going on, so I can understand that.
David?
Yeah.
It's Bernie Stinger here. It falls under the public service heading, but I'll throw it out there anyway.
Okay.
I just got back in town from Tucson.
Okay.
Being a member of the Tucson Astronomical Group, and gathered as an alternative to people coming out to the observing sites. And they've gone over really, really spectacularly. We've been quite impressed with how well they've done. And we've done a couple of them now and did live Facebook events, basically using my telescope set up in a dark site and then streaming, streaming that out. Recently, about 2 weeks ago, we were contacted by the rangers over at the Grand Canyon concerning the Grand Canyon Star Party. It was canceled this, like most events, because of the COVID situation, and they saw the virtual star party that we did and said, could we do something like that as an alternative to the Grand Canyon Star Party? So 3 of us in the club using my telescope did 2 hour-and-a-half long virtual star parties, and we looked at about a dozen different objects that
So when they looked at these objects, and they then just describe what the object was and gave some few facts and stuff about it, that type of thing. Is that
Exactly. Yeah, I would stare over to the object, and then I had a couple of other gentlemen and myself, kind of with the scripts, read out what the object was and so on.
Okay.
And the Grand Canyon Rangers are going to be playing these recordings during the the week of June 14th. So if you check on the Grand Canyon website, they're probably going to post when those are going.
Okay.
Put it on our forum as well for anyone who wants to see them. And I was also contacted by a representative at the Fred Lawrence Whipple Observatory as part of the Center for Astrophysics. And they are put a star party on the 20th of June. This is going to be broadcast, I think, to the general public. And I'm going to be assisting them with that, doing a broadcast from my house here in Ridgefield, if the sun cooperates.
Okay.
So
All right.
I'd throw that out because I know we're not doing anything like that I'm aware of, and we might want to consider it as an alternative to the star parties out at Eagle Lake.
We can certainly consider that. We'll have to find someone who can kind of spearhead that and then pull things together. Along those lines, in a similar fashion, at the July meeting, we're going to go out with an invitation to our imagers in the club here to select an image that they've taken over the last 2 or 3 months, and we'll show it on the screen, and you can talk about the image and then maybe some of the equipment that you use to take the image and all. Not a whole lot of technical detail, just kind of some basics, but we just thought it'd be nice to see what types of images people have been taking. I know that I've seen a few of them on a couple of different platforms, and so be looking for a forum post on that. We'll want, I'm going to guess about 10 to 15 people to show an image that they've taken and talk about it. So that's what we're planning for the July meeting. But to your point, Bernie, we can certainly see if we can pull something together that would be like a virtual star party. The thought has come to me too to do that. We just got to figure out how we can best do that. Okay. Let's see. There we go. All right, the call for Gemini articles, always there. If you have an article, I thought this last issue was pretty good and had some interesting articles in it. So if you have anything that you could write about, may want to write about that virtual star party, Bernie, that's something you could submit. Articles will probably be due by July 10th for the next issue. Does that sound about right, Father Brown? I know that you're on, but I'm pretty sure that's probably going to be the good due date for that.
Yes, the July 10th is the deadline.
Yep.
For the August issue.
Okay, good. All right. Astronomical League. Jerry Jones, are you on the call tonight? I don't know. Did you see him join? Matt?
I cannot say I have. I'm just trying to scroll through my list as well.
All right. Well, Jerry didn't get a hold of me, so I don't know that if he has any Astronomical League awards right now. But I know that at the very least, he'd tell you to get out there and observe. So if you can do that, get out there and observe. Okay. And I think that brings us to our feature presentation, The Underappreciated Heroes of Apollo. And Mr. Emmert, I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting here, and you can start presenting. And I think that'll work out pretty well.
I will see if I can get the. Hang on here.
Okay.
Look at this. Oh, there we go. All right. Do you guys see that one?
It's coming. And there it is. Very good.
Cool. Okay. Anyway, yeah, I had signed up with Ahmed to do this one probably about a month ago, and I'm kind of going, gosh, instead of talking about something ancient 50 to 60 years ago, maybe I should have, after seeing the Starlink, or not the Starlink, well, that one too, but after seeing the Dragon, the Crew Dragon launch, I should have talked about that perhaps, because that was really cool to watch. But anyway, we've got this one for now, so I'm going to go through this. It's a couple of months back, I think it was the February meeting, that we had gotten Nancy Atkinson lined up to present and talk about her 2 books. And you know, I thought, geez, I really want to see those things. So I actually went to Amazon and bought the 2 books. Unfortunately, I haven't even cracked those books open yet, because at the same time that I was looking at those books and ordering those 2, I found this other one. It was a lower cost book, and it was there, and it was related, of course. And I go, The Ultimate Engineer, George Low. And you know, any of the autobiographies or biographies of any of the people involved with Apollo were of interest to me, because I've got a big stack of them from, you know, a number of the astronauts, from Gene Kranz, from Chris Kraft, quite a few others, and wanted to add this one to my collection. And I took a look at it, and I was just absolutely flabbergasted by this book. You know, I knew that George Low, as I have on the words on the screen, that I knew that he was, you know, some NASA officer, and he was one of those guys always in the back row of, you know, during missions and everything. But I didn't know exactly, you know, who he was, what he did, what his contribution was, other than he was a NASA manager, so he must be important. So anyway, started reading this book, and it's just amazing. Apollo would not have happened if he wouldn't have been there. Almost 100% certain of that. So anyway, you know, that's why I wanted to kind of talk about this, George Low and a few other people that really, if these folks wouldn't have been there, we wouldn't have had that moon program. It just wouldn't have happened, because we wouldn't have had the leadership, the vision, the excitement that we had back in those days. So anyway, a little bit about who he is and you know, where he came from. So he was at NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which was the predecessor organization, if you will, to NASA. He joined about 10 years before NASA's creation, and he was working on the in Lewis Field, Lewis Research Lab in Cleveland, and worked on the X-plane program. Basically, he was working on a lot of hypersonic flights. For example, the year prior to Sputnik, he had put on a training seminar together on hypersonic flight, and it was titled From Mach 4 to Infinity. And it was basically getting people out of just learning, you know, dealing with aeronautics, but dealing with hypersonic flight, dealing with space flight. And so he was really spot on well before there was any mandate from NACA or from NASA or from the administration or anybody to start looking at the moon landing. So anyway, he was working on that X-plane program primarily. He did meet and work a little bit with Neil Armstrong during that time, because Neil Armstrong was a civilian test pilot at that point. And then after the Sputnik had been launched, that was when NACA's direction had changed a little bit. Abe Silverstein, well, actually, back up a little bit. Hugh Dryden, the director of NACA, he chaired a meeting of all of the lab directors in December 1957 to discuss where are they going to be going, what's their new role in this new environment. After, you know, that we've got space travel happening, and that's where there were a couple of things that happened. They set a goal to develop the manned space satellites and, you know, the technology for it, but also they started reorganizing NACA and NASA a little bit. So Abe Silverstein had that group of engineers that he put together for a task force, and Lowe was one of those people that were putting together those plans for the initial manned spaceflight. So looking at a couple of timeline type things. So in October 58, this is one month before NACA became NASA. Silverstein tapped Lowe to come to Washington, D.C. to help out for a couple of weeks. Before that, he was hoping to work with Bob Gilruth and Max Faget. I don't know how to pronounce his name, Faget, whatever, the designer of the Mercury capsule, to work hands-on, but unfortunately they felt they needed Lowe a little bit more at Washington, D.C. to help out. So he was going to go there for a couple of weeks. Well, a couple of weeks turned into a much longer time, and he ended up staying in Washington for a number of years, and he became the head of NASA's Office of Manned Spaceflight. The interesting thing, he was working with Bob Gilruth, and I don't know if you know who Bob Gilruth is. Probably most of this audience does, but anyway, he was basically the head of the Manned Space Flight Center. But Gilruth actually came from here. He was born up in Nashwauk, Minnesota, up in Itasca County. Went to high school in Duluth Central, right in, just up the hill from downtown. And I've been in that building a number of times because I did some stuff in high school. I'm just kind of thinking it's kind of cool. I've been in one of the same buildings as Bob Gilruth. I always get freaked out with that kind of stuff. But anyway, yeah, I was in Central High School once for high school for a program thing I did. And also I was taking care of the Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium mainframes, the equivalent to TIES that Dick Jacobson worked for up there, and worked on some of the stuff up in there. So anyway, get off my tangent there. But anyway, he attended high school up there in Duluth, and then he received his Bachelor's of Science in Aeronautical Engineering, and then also a Master of Science at the U of M down here in the Twin Cities. So we have a local guy that was in charge of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Dave Faulkner. You didn't happen to notice, did they have some sort of plaque or something to recognize him at the high school?
Unfortunately, it was long enough ago that I wouldn't have looked for one. And, I wasn't as big of a, hey, everything about Apollo back then as I am now. So I would have missed it if it was there.
Yeah, okay.
So anyway, continuing a little bit, it's really, as I was reading this book, it was really almost frightening to see how much George Lowe was a principal advocate for lunar landing as a worthy goal. Pretty much everybody else was looking at, okay, maybe we can do a circumnavigation of the moon, or maybe we can do something else. But really, he was the one that was pushing the most for lunar landing. So just chronologically looking at some of this stuff, April 1959, there is a committee that was charged with putting this long-range strategy together for the agency, and Lowe was the one that was really pushing for moon landing out of that. And it's interesting, there were some other people that were pushing for that kind of thing. Most notably, Wernher von Braun was pushing, but Wernher von Braun had this, we need to go to go out to the universe, and it was rocketry for rocketry's sake, or just space travel for space travel's sake. Whereas Lowe, being an engineer, he was really looking at it as a technical challenge. It's something that would be challenging, exciting. It'd be a lot of hard work, but it would be something really cool to do from an engineering standpoint. So that's the standpoint he was taking it from. During this time frame, he'd been really, from 49 when he got there to 59, he was really showing a lot of his just general capabilities on that. He as an engineer and engineering manager, he working up through the ranks at NACA and the earlier years of NASA. One thing, when he was putting meetings together, he was really into speed, conciseness, getting things done the way they should be. Punctual meetings. If you're late, you're locked out. There was one that Matt Faget was like 10 minutes to. He was locked out. He didn't get into the meeting. He planned 45-minute long meetings, typically 45 minutes. And if it turned out to be shorter, great. You've got time to write up your notes earlier and things like that. But, if you go on way too long, it's just going to be boring. You're not going to make the point and that sort of stuff. There was one, I forgot the name of the person, but there was one person that did the typical thing a lot of us do, start out linearly working on some talk about something, and it was like 35 minutes into this thing, Lowe tells him, hey, you better make your point in the next 10 minutes or we're done. And he, okay, yep, I'll do that. And he keeps on going, and 10 minutes later, boom, notebook's closed, Lowe walks out of the meeting. And the guy found, okay, that's how that one works. So the next time around, start with the conclusion and then work up to how you created the conclusion. Another thing that's really was really characteristic of George Lowe is he documented everything. He was reading everything. He always worked on all the memos that were going around. He always had a green Sharpie for his comments, and all the documents are modified or made the notation with the with this green Sharpie. So that's instantly you can tell it's George Lowe's stuff. So anyway, very organized, very smart, great engineer, great engineering manager, and the best moon landing advocate that there was out there. So really, if he wouldn't have been there, it wouldn't have worked. So anyway, things were going along. Unfortunately, things were going along a little bit slowly because, remember, before 1961, it was still the Eisenhower administration, and Eisenhower was not into space at all. The reason he created NASA in the first place was he wanted that civilian organization. Whoops, let's back up. I bumped. I'm going the wrong way. Sorry about that. I bumped something and the slide started to go. But anyway, if you think of 59 and 60, that was still Eisenhower's administration, and Eisenhower wasn't really into the space program at all. He felt it was a big, huge waste of money. He did see fit to create NASA, of course, but he made it a civilian agency as opposed to a military agency, of course. So anyway, one interesting thing is during the Eisenhower administration, they saw Mercury, they wanted to create Mercury as a response to Yuri Gagarin and, Russia having the first man in space and everything. But he really saw Mercury as a dead end. He didn't want to spend any more money. He felt it was, basically just, a silly waste of money to spend the billions of dollars to go to the moon or do much of anything else. So things were hard for somebody that was a moon advocate back in those early 1959, 1960, early 61 days. But then, April 12th, 1961, Russia put the first man in space. And unfortunately, as we all know, they beat us. And they didn't have to have beat us because Alan Shepard's flight actually was ready before that. But we had a couple of anomalies in the last test flight before that. And Wernher von Braun wanted to have one additional test flight to make sure that all the anomalies were taken care of. And they were. And unfortunately, we weren't able to launch Alan Shepard on his suborbital flight until May 5th, 61, a few weeks, about 3 weeks after the Gagarin's flight. At least one good thing came out of that flight, though, is the United States populace just became really excited. And Lowe saw he could take that opportunity of the excitement right then, and it decided it was time for a big push into that long-range goal to go to the moon. So he knew that with the right focus, enough money, it could be done, as we've obviously shown. So somewhere in that same time frame, there was a symposium in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and there was a big symposium that with a number of scientists and everything. But it was interesting that JFK, I'm kind of skipping around a little bit. I was talking about the lack of enthusiasm with Eisenhower. Well, early on, JFK didn't have much enthusiasm for it either, but he had that big problem with the Bay of Pigs disaster, and he needed a policy win. So he tasked LBJ to survey NASA, survey the military, survey industry to find out what would be a feasible goal. What could we do to get ahead of the Russians? And of course, LBJ having that committee that I talked about a little bit earlier. I think I've actually skipped saying that he was the head of the Senate committee that Lowe had talked to. But anyway, he saw that the moon could be a feasible long-range goal. So it was during this first symposium of peaceful use of space was the title of it. During that symposium, he actually made his speech to the joint session of Congress, and it was televised live to the symposium in Tulsa. And basically, he used George Lowe's words and George Lowe's plans. That's basically what that was created from. So it's really kind of interesting. Unfortunately, in the pictures here, I don't have a picture of JFK at the joint session of Congress meeting, but I do have him saying essentially the same speech at Rice University a couple of years later, or a year later, rather. So anyway, so things changed a little bit. Lowe, working together with Bob Gilruth, they determined the need for Gemini as this interim program. You know, I kind of skipped over Mercury. Mercury is going along, and again, Eisenhower thought it was going to be kind of a dead-end program. There's not much early on in the JFK administration that it wasn't going to be any different, but then they determined that it's not technically feasible to jump directly from Mercury to Apollo. They needed this interim program. So Lowe and Gilruth determined that need. They worked out the framework for the Gemini program, and it didn't have a lot of strong support within NASA at first, but both Gilruth and Lowe really pushed to keep it alive and make it happen. So again, probably the way that it worked out wouldn't have happened too much without Lowe. Later on, in February '64, Lowe was transferred from Washington to the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston. And, you know, so I forgot his exact title at that time, but he's now in the operational area. And of course, Russia was still ahead of us at that time. Russia had Leonov's EVA, and he was pushing for Gemini 4, Ed White, to have that EVA. So at least we weren't seen as being too far behind the Russians at that point in time. And that was actually, I think that's while he was program director, deputy center director. So he was somewhat in charge of Gemini, but not completely. So anyway, this picture, Chris Kraft, of course, flight operations, Bob Gilruth, the manager, and George Lowe talking during that one of the Gemini sessions in '65. All these pictures, by the way, I've scanned from the book. So moving on, you know, Gemini happened. Taking a look at after the Apollo 1 fire. So, Shay. I'm drawing a blank on Shay's name. First name, but anyway, Shay was the Apollo program manager, but the program was really in disarray, and Shay had basically kind of gone off the deep end, and he needed to get replaced. So Lowe was named the manager of the Apollo Space Program Office, and he took it. You know, it was his job to fix all of the organizational problems associated with it. So two of the main things he did were he spearheaded the use of FMEA, the failure mode and effects analysis, to define the possible risks that are in spaceflight and try to mitigate those risks. Also, probably more importantly, he created and he chaired the Configuration Control Board, the CCB, which was to monitor all of the technical changes that could be that were going to be put into the Apollo capsule, and you know what would affect other things. So part of the CCB is it was all of the managers. I don't have the list. Sure, I put it in the notes where I can't see it. All the managers, primary managers, had to be there. You know, Deke Slayton, Chris Kraft, Gilruth, Max Faget. All of the primary people had to be attending these meetings. There were once a week meetings, Friday noon till whenever they plowed through all of the problems that they had to deal with each week, and no substitutes, no proxies, you know, nobody coming in your place instead. It had to be these people because they were the ones that were responsible for all of the changes. This was the only type of meeting that was a different than the rule that he had set a long time ago of having 45-minute long meetings. These, just because of the sheer number of changes that they had to deal with and the discussions they had to go through to get to the correct change, you know, these could last from Friday noon till many hours later in the evening. So they met 90 times from June '67 to July '69. And as you can see on the slide, 1,697 changes to the Apollo capsule, and they approved 1,341 of those. So a huge number of changes, obviously, that were made between the Block 1 and the Block 2 capsules. Another thing that George Low pushed, so when we were getting by August 68, it was getting to be clear that the command and service module was getting pretty far along. They'd fixed a lot of the problems. It was getting along, but the lunar module was way not ready for prime time yet. And it was at the same time that we were getting evidence that Russia was getting close to launching something to the moon. So Low was the guy that came up with the idea of the Apollo 8 flight, the circumnavigation flight around the moon. And you can see the quote from Gilruth down in the lower right-hand corner of this, that basically it was a stroke of genius. It took a lot of work to convince NASA management, the NASA administrator and the upper level management to do this thing. But everybody was for it, and it worked, obviously. But another one of Low's ideas, if he wouldn't have been there, we may or may not have had the Apollo 8 flight when it happened. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that this guy did that he was just instrumental to it. And again, as I started out before, he was just, one of these guys in the back row of mission control when you take a look at the pictures. But my gosh, this guy did just about everything.
Hey,
he
Steve.
was involved in everything. Yeah.
This is Dave again. So if the Russians are getting ready to do a manned flight to the moon, I see. So that not necessarily landing on the moon, just getting to the moon.
Correct.
That's what Apollo 8, we did it first, and so it kind of broke their back. Okay, I got you now.
Exactly. Yeah. No, they weren't quite ready for a landing on the moon, obviously. They never did make it because their Proton rocket kept blowing up anyway. But they actually did. Remember, we were scared by, I don't remember the exact timing, but they had put a capsule in orbit around the moon, and it was sending back a recording of a voice. So it scared the heck out of us during that time frame.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha. So anyway, just to finish up a little bit on Low, I kind of skipped way over his early years. So he was born in Vienna, Austria in 1926. His family was Jewish, but they weren't really practicing Jewish. But unfortunately, Nazi-controlled Austria was a bad place to be for anybody Jewish. They lost all of their money. They were actually a pretty well-to-do family there. And they pretty much had to leave everything behind. They went first to Switzerland, then England, and finally landed in the U.S. He landed in the New York area, so Forest Hills High School in 43. It's an interesting note. He's an engineering guy, but look at some of the alumni from this Forest Hills High School. Burt Bacharach, I said that wrong, Burt Bacharach, a couple of columnists, Art Buchwald and Ron Chernow, but also Simon and Garfunkel were classmates of his. From high school, he went to the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI, and he started there, went off to war, and then came back and finished up his degree. So after he did that, then he went to Convair for a little bit, but then ended up at NACA and the stuff that I described earlier on in the presentation. After all of the stuff that I had in the previous slides, he stayed at NASA. He was deputy administrator that he became in 1969 and December 69, so around about the Apollo 12 time frame. And he did a lot of work in the early planning for the shuttle. He retired from NASA in 76, and then he went back to become the president of Rensselaer. And he remained there until he passed away on July 17th. And it was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He actually learned that he won it. He was notified that he won it the day before he died. But it was awarded to his widow, a little bit later on May 23rd, 85. And also another interesting thing is his son, David, was chosen to be a shuttle astronaut, and indeed was a shuttle astronaut through the late 80s, early 90s. So anyway, a lot of stuff about George Low. Again, I was flabbergasted just by how important this one person was to the Apollo program. People that you know more about are like the flight directors, Chris Kraft, These are, again, scans of the covers of the book. You can kind of see by the edges they're kind of well worn because I've read them a lot a few years ago. But Chris was, of course, NASA's first flight director. He created the Mercury Control Center. He, basically did all of that stuff. He was with NASA until 1982. One of his deputies, if you will, is Gene Kranz. Didn't quite get as high. He was a flight director through Apollo 17 and deputy director of NASA mission operations in 1974 through around about 83, and he left NASA quite a bit later. These guys are well known, obviously. Failure is not an option for, he actually didn't say that, but he said some stuff pretty close to it, and it was obviously quoted in the movie Apollo 13, and he took it from that point onward. But in these two books, there are a lot of other people that were talked about in anecdotes as they went through their history. So that's why I wanted to put these two up, just to talk about some of those people. Of course, the first one, Bob Gilruth, who I talked about a little bit before, he became the head of the Space Task Group, the first director of the Manned Spacecraft Center, and he was really a quiet guy in the background. He did not want the limelight. He participated in the press conferences he needed to, but he really wanted to have his deputies get the limelight. But then other people, Dr. Max, Dave, do you know, how do you pronounce his last name? Because I've never seen it pronounced. I've only seen it printed. So
I would say Faget or Faget. Probably.
I don't want to say it the way I
right.
see it.
And I'm pretty sure it's not that one.
Probably not. Anyway, but he was one of those engineers that formed the Space Task Group in '58, and basically he's the guy that came up with the blunt body capsule design, with the fat end of the capsule coming through reentry with the heat shields, and even used up to a couple, well, it hasn't come back down yet, but anyway, like the SpaceX Dragon capsules. So that same design is in use pretty much everywhere. Another one that was mentioned a lot in Gene Kranz's autobiography, Bill Tyndall. He was in the missions analysis branch, and he was another engineer working for George Low, but he had a number of I think there were weekly meetings, but he'd summarize these things in great detail, 2, 3, 4 page long memos that became known as Tyndallgrams. And these guys, it was like getting the newspaper. You just waited to get his summary of these things. And I love this one where he's talking about, okay, so when they land on the moon and we want to stay there, is it go, no go? Or is that confusing? Maybe we should make it stay, no stay. So he came up with right here that I think we better make this stay, no stay instead of go, no go, because we don't know, does go mean stay or does go mean get the heck out of there? So, and he also, when he'd have these musings about that, he'd call himself Aunt Emma. So when he worried about these things. So those things were pretty cool. A couple of other Tyndallgram excerpts, and you can see, and these are long things. I just pulled out some stuff because you can download the PDF of these things. But this one's actually the top one of these two. You can kind of think of how Apollo 11 was affected by this one, or should have been affected by this one, because he feels the crew shouldn't be diddling around with the diski during powered descent unless it's necessary. They'll never hit the wrong button, of course, but if they do, the results can be rather lousy. Kind of like Buzz Aldrin always calling up for the radar display, and that's when they get the 1201 alarm. Then following that, another Tyndallgram, the Apollo 12 crew, bless their hearts, are anxious to avoid any unnecessary diddling with the diski. So I think they learned their lesson from what he was doing, because they're asking for the flight controllers to monitor the delta H, the difference between the landing radar measured and the ping's estimated altitude. So just a lot of cool things like that. There are hundreds and hundreds of these Tyndallgrams that are saved that you can take a look at if you were interested in that. I basically just did a PDF search. Fortunately, they're searchable, and pulled up a couple of ones that I thought were pretty cool. Another guy that probably this crew has heard of, but the general public may not have, John Aaron. If you remember on Apollo 12, it was hit by lightning a couple of times on the way up, and and all of the instrumentation went out. The rocket was still being propelled, being controlled by the Saturn computer, but the one in Apollo 12 capsule was just dead. And he had seen this before, so he did that flight try SCE to auxiliary. So service conditioning equipment to auxiliary, to change the power source for the equipment. And of course, everything came back and he saved it. He's also the guy that you've seen, he was the one in Apollo 13, the movie, that, he was the one that was rationing all of the lunar module consumption. So you can see what he looked like back in the day. And also, you have seen him probably in a lot of more recent interviews and things. So this is what he looks like today. Another person, Steve Bales, he was Guido, the Guido flight controller. Again, we all know what happened with Apollo 11 with the 1201 and 1202 program alarms. The very final simulation that Gene Kranz's team, because Gene Kranz's team was the one that was tasked with the landing. The final Apollo 11 simulation, like a month and a half before the flight, or maybe a month before the flight, the SimSups threw this 1201 program alarm at the team, and Bales is going, wait a minute, I don't know what this, I know what it is, but is it bad? How bad is it? And he aborts the landing, and learned that he was not supposed to abort the landing because, as we all know now, it was a temporary situation. As long as it doesn't happen too often, the computer was a whole lot better than the ones we've got now in one respect, that it could immediately restart. Excuse me a sec. It could immediately restart and take over again. So anyway, because of the knowledge on that last simulation, he was able to do the calls that were go on that alarm and continued to descend. Oops. Of course, he wouldn't have known that without the simulation supervisors. Dick Coos was the Dick Coos was the SimSup on that one. He's the one that actually created that 1201 program alarm simulation. So when they aborted it on that simulation, and they shouldn't have, he's telling them, you shouldn't have done that. He worked with Steve Bales and that team over that weekend, because Steve Bales said, hey, okay, I've got to grab a team together, worked over the weekend, worked with Dick Coos' group. Okay, what alarms are ones that we would have to abort for, and which ones don't we have to abort for? And of course, 1201 and 1202 were not on the abort list. And of course, that wouldn't have happened without Dick Coos. And these guys in general, I haven't dug into the simulation supervisors and the how they did the simulations per se, how they came up with the scenarios, but I always kind of, just in the back of my mind, think it's kind of amazing that they didn't, they've never done this before. So they're not simulating something that they've done before, that they know what the results are going to be. How did they manage to come up with all of the failure scenarios and work through all of the rules so that we had a successful program? I think it's just amazing with the work that these guys did. And then just a couple of others. There was a big core group of people for the Space Task Group, engineers that came from Canada. They actually came from England, but there was a Canadian company, AV-Roll, that had recruited a bunch of engineers from England for their Aero Advanced Jet Fire. As soon as these people were settled in Toronto, Canada canceled that program. NASA got wind of that and contacted James Chamberlain, who had been the group leader for that, found out, okay, these are the guys we want to get. So 25 of these people were offered positions at NASA, James Chamberlain and 24 others. And Chris Kraft for the flight operations got 5 of those guys, and including Tech Roberts and John Hodge. Of course, John Hodge became a flight controller. Tech Roberts, the interesting thing, and I learned this from Gene Kranz's book, that he had been selected by Chris to be part of that core flight control team in Mercury. He was the trajectory, but he went off and he actually designed, I put down there helped, but I think he was the primary designer for the well, he helped the Mercury Control Center. I take that back. He was the prime designer for the mission control in Houston that we've all seen in the movies and on TV and in the documentaries for the Gemini and Apollo missions. So that was his baby, creating mission control as we've seen it. And I'll finally end up with one that, you know, again, most of everybody here would have known, but it's important, that John Hobolt, just an engineer at the Langley Research Center, he was the first primary advocate for Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, LOR, which, if we wouldn't have done it that way, there wouldn't have been enough power in the rocket to be able to get there. We would have had to either have something larger than the Saturn V. We would have had to have the Nova rocket, which wasn't under development, or use multiple Saturn V's to lift all of the payload necessary to have a big rocket land on the moon and take off again. So John Hobolt and LOR was another thing that was just instrumental in that program, and without him, it wouldn't have happened the way it did. So that's there are thousands and thousands of people, but that's a good one to end on, I think. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Dave.
All right, Steve, thanks a lot. All right. Do you want to go ahead and stop presenting?
As soon as I figure out where to, yeah, stop presenting. There we go.
All right. And I will present now.
And I did see Jerry Jones pop in, maybe, if you want to ask him.
So, Jerry, do we have any awards this month? We'll wait while Jerry figures out how to unmute his mic. So,
hopefully he stayed in.
All right.
I actually kind of had a question for Steve, if you would.
Sure, go ahead.
So,
Okay.
Steve, as an engineer myself, I find that executives have a way of making promises that the engineers have to keep. And I'm wondering, you get President Kennedy up there and others, giving essentially an ultimatum. You've got to get these people on the moon by the end of the decade. I was wondering, in your reading about these folks, did anybody ever just say that's just absolutely nuts? I mean, how did they go from this is crazy talk where we have to invent everything we need, basically from scratch, and that kind of stuff. How do they get from that point all the way to actually succeeding on this before the end of '69?
Yeah, well, there were a lot of people that said, "Oh man, this is crazy talk." Yeah, even Gilruth was going when that announcement was made during that Tulsa.
Oopsies.
Oopsie. Lost you, Steve.
Am I there now?
There you are.
Yep.
Okay. I bumped the physical button. Anyway, even Gilruth goes, "I'm not sure we can do this." And to tell you the truth, I don't think Kennedy actually was certain we were going to, he wanted to make, he wanted it, of course, to come true if it could, but even he thought it was going to be probably a stretch. So, the interesting thing is, too, before he got killed, he was kind of backing off on the thing. He was thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be so expensive, which it was. And am I going to, can the U.S. economy afford this? Can we simply do this? And he was looking at, he was actually started talking to Khrushchev and say, can we do a joint thing? Can we, instead of working against each other, can we work together and cooperate to go to the moon? And, basically Khrushchev was blowing him off because, they were at that point in time a long way ahead of us. But he was starting to back off on the promise internally. He hadn't done anything publicly yet. So it's kind of, you look at JFK got killed in 1963, LBJ became president. And if you remember, in a lot of those early things, LBJ was a huge space advocate. And, JFK, getting killed and LBJ taking over, I don't know if we would have had an Apollo program, at least in the form that it was, unless that exact thing wouldn't have happened. So there's a lot of weird things in that history that if it wouldn't have fallen out in exactly the way that it did, we may not have ever done that.
Okay, Jerry said he can't figure out how to unmute his mic, and there's no AL awards this month. So very good, Jerry. Thank you for the note. All right, then. And that takes us to the end of the meeting. The next meeting is Thursday, July 2nd. I believe it will probably be an online meeting, but keep your eyes on the main page to see the announcement. If it is in fact another online meeting, we'll certainly advertise that. We'll advertise the link for that, and we will also send out the MailChimp and all the other forms of communication, so everybody will have the link to join. Had a nice crowd this time, 69 people I see who are attending. So thank you very much. Is there anything else before we adjourn? All right. Well, then I'm going to go ahead and close the recording, and this will be available on the forum as a recording. The chat will also be up there as a PDF, and the presentation, my presentation, will be up there. And Steve, if you want to send your presentation to me, I can put that up there as well.
Okay, and I've already sent that to you about an hour ago, or an hour or two ago, so you've got it.
Very good, very good. All right, everybody. Well, if you have a chance to go out and view, please do. Remember 10:06 tonight is the chain of the satellites are coming across. Yeah, all right. So
All right.
everybody have a good
Thank you,
evening.
everybody.
You bet. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. All right, let's see now. Okay. Stop recording. Stop recording. Here we go.